Bienvenidos a todo mi gente. ¿Qué pasa? It is time for episode 32 of Stir Crazy, our irreverent, off the cuff take about the news and everything percolating through the news cycle. Basically, where we talk real shit about the news right here on the News Network. I'm your host, Kim Brown. Coming up today, now listen, on Friday, we promised you that we were going to do something interesting, something different that we have not done here yet as of before. So let me let you know off the top. Today, we are going to take your calls live via Zoom. If you have questions, if you have comments, if you have concerns, well, you can keep your damn concerns. But if you have comments and or questions, we want you to reach out to us via Zoom. Now, listen, you know we're not taking nobody anonymously, so you got to at least be willing to put your face up on the place. So what you're going to do is locate in the comments. We're going to pin it at the very top, the Zoom number. So if you want to talk to us live, which I don't know how good of an idea this is, but it's going to be available. So if you want to talk to us live, you can do so today. So look for the Zoom information in the comments. The number is going to be pinned at the top. So let me let you know what's on today's agenda, as it were. So Bernie, Kamala, and Ed Markley said that they're going to make it official. Okay. They have introduced a bill in the Senate which would guarantee $2,000 a month in economic relief for people who have been, all of us have been affected by this pandemic and subsequent closures and shutdowns or whatever, but $2,000 per person in the household. That's quite a bit of money. And I think that we absolutely can afford it. We're going to explore that coming up in a bit. Also, in Wuhan, China, guess who's Bizak? The Rona. Yep, you heard it. So what they're going to do is they're going to somehow test 11 million people, all 11 million people in the province. That sounds quite amazing. And I think that we could learn a thing or 2 or 3 or 3 million from China in that. And speaking of the outbreak returning, Dr. Anthony Fauci today addressed the Senate and says, y'all simple nignogs can reopen the economy if you want to, but guess what's going to happen come this fall? All bad things. So we're going to get into all that as well. That's where we're going to start. But of course, it's time for me to bring in our fantastic panel, per usual. Joining us today, we have our Real News climate reporter, Aman Azhar. Also joining us today. Hi, Aman. Love your hair, Aman. That's a lion mane right there, baby.
Well, you're gonna say that to me?
Oh well, Mark, you have a.
I used to have hair like that.
That's okay. Okay, used to is the place to be. Of course, there we go. Marc Steiner, he's managing editor here at The Real News, also veteran broadcaster and host and producer here at The Real News and co-host of the radio show on Sputnik Radio, By Any Means Necessary. Fan favorite on Stir Crazy, Jacqueline Luqman. What's up, panel?
Up, people?
Thank you guys for being here. Well, gang, where I want to start is with Dr. Fauci. Anthony Fauci, the director of the infectious diseases and allergic reactions. I don't know what Fauci is, but he's very important. Obviously, he's been one of the central people from the medical community dealing with the coronavirus. And today he addressed the Senate. And, you know, Dr. Fauci, I feel bad for him because he looked like he doesn't really sleep well at night. And I can't imagine how you could sleep well at night listening to Trump's buffoonery day in and day out. But he addressed the Senate today and he offered definite warnings about reopening the country too quickly without adequate testing and without a vaccine. Let's hear from him.
My concern is that if states or cities or regions, their attempt, understandable, to get back to some form of normality, disregard to a greater or lesser degree the checkpoints that we put in our guidelines about when it is safe to proceed in pulling back on mitigation. Because I feel if that occurs, there is a real risk that you will trigger an outbreak that you may not be able to control, which in fact, paradoxically, will set you back, not only leading to some suffering and death that could be avoided, but could even set you back on the road to trying to get economic recovery, because it would almost turn the clock back rather than going forward. That is my major concern, Sen.
You know, panel, My concern is that these words are going to echo back at us 6 months from now. And it's going to be like, well, Dr. Fauci told y'all motherfuckers don't open up the goddamn economy until we have everything squared away, which we clearly do not have. So Marc Steiner, hearing Dr. Fauci sort of issued this sort of ominous, not sort of, it is an ominous warning, saying that in our haste to get the economy back on track, we could be cutting off our nose to spite our face 6 months to 12 months in the future.
It's true. I mean, look, but the big thing about Corona at this moment is that there's so much we do not know about this disease. There's so much every day, if you follow the news closely and follow the scientific journals, medical journals closely, that there's a new symptom every day. There's a new body of people who are getting sick with Corona with symptoms that didn't appear before in other people. That's why children are getting sick all of a sudden. They're finding children who are test positive for Corona who are ill with something different that's affecting them. It's affecting different organs and parts of our body all over. So I think this is just, this really shows the major political divide in this country. I mean, there was an interesting article in Forbes magazine about how they zeroed in on where the leaders of this movement are coming from: Rifle Association, conservative right-wing groups, militias, pro-gun lobby, that are the conservative groups in different Republican parties around the Midwest are kind of fomenting this kind of open up now that Trump is pushing. And it's clearly a political divide that I think will hurt them in the end, but it could really devastate us if that becomes part of the body politic. They start opening up in mass. It's absolutely insane. I mean, there are ways to open up that are interesting. I just before we went on the air together, I read this article about in Denmark, some restaurants are opening up, and what they're doing is they're creating these little plastic cubicle bubbles. People can go sit in them, and they serve you food. So you stay safely away from each other. Everybody's wearing masks that serve you the food and gloves, but you sit in these little space capsules and eat dinner by the river. Just an interesting idea.
Well, what's also happening in France, they're starting to reopen, and the tube, the metro, has been slammed with people, which is the exact opposite, I think, of what they have asked people to do to avoid public transport. But Jackie, if you're telling people that we're trying to make things safer, to reopen things, people are sort of chomping at the bit, being inside for all these many weeks. They want to get outside, they want to get their hair done, et cetera, et cetera. But is the risk right now an appropriate risk for all of us to be taking, even though all of us are not assuming the same level of risk?
No, I mean, I think it's a ridiculous level of risk to be taken. People like to downplay, well, people have been downplaying the risks of contracting and dying from this virus by saying, oh, well, such a small percentage of people have died. Many, many more people have recovered. People have not taken into account two things, I think. And this is just from my completely non-scientific observation, just shit I see just by looking at the situation as it exists. The number of people who are reported to have recovered does not equal the number of total cases of positive COVID cases in this country, minus the deaths. So there is still an enormous number of people who are still right now being treated for this virus who have not recovered. And we don't know if they are going to die. And that's horrifying. And then the other observation that really blows my mind is that people are downplaying 81,000 people dead from this virus in 3 months, as if that's not a big deal. When you look at it proportionately, I guess we're talking about 1 in 3 people in this country. You pick one person out of your family that you want to die, that you're willing to die, that you're willing to let die from this virus, or whatever the ratio is, the 3 out of 5, you pick 3 people out of your family that you're cool with getting this virus. If 5 people in your family get this virus and 2 or 3 people die, you pick the 2 or 3 people that you're cool with dying from this virus. Because see, when that is the decision people who are not like you have to make. And largely, most of the people who have been dying from this virus have been people of color, poor Black people, Native people, poor Latinos, and it is a class difference. We're talking about a lot of people who are already at the bottom end of the caste system in this country. We're already having to face, who we're willing to die in our families because we can't afford to work from home. We're quote unquote essential. So that's why the coalition to open up America looks the way it does. But when these people who are in these coalitions, who go to these protests, start testing positive and their family members start dying, then the conversation is going to be slightly different. That's not something I wish on anyone, but that is the reality of the situation. And unfortunately, it's going to take, like some of these people in Wisconsin, there were 70 plus new coronavirus cases in Wisconsin after the reopen Wisconsin protest just recently. I mean, this is the calculus that people are making, and it's a calculus that's costing a lot of people their lives.
Aman, Mark and Jackie bring up excellent points, given the fact that we don't have enough testing. People who are deemed essential are basically being sacrificed on the front lines of this economy. And yet there have been 2 positive coronavirus tests confirmed at the White House, which underscores how difficult it is to keep this virus out of a lot of places, even places that are routinely tested, which most places are not. But the fact that, Trump hasn't even been able to keep this virus out of his own domicile is, I think, a harbinger about why we should pump the brakes in terms of reopening everything back up.
And on top of everything, Kim, there has to be some kind of a conclusive science to be shared with the public. I mean, where is the science behind all these public announcements coming out of the White House, really? It seems as though the only thing right now is about the economy, the economic argument is kind of trumping the health argument. I mean, you can't just run economy with sick people. It's just not right. So I think this is it's being pushed out, like Mark was saying, with there's a lot of right-wing kind of push behind this argument of opening up the economy. But when you look at what really is happening, it's quite clear that there is no whole of the government approach behind this kind of an argument. It's just that, okay, let's just get this wheel turning and we'll see what happens. Is this really how a first world democracy should work? I wonder. And then there's even more complications. I mean, does the public know, even beyond just taking a step back and doing what they can in terms of social distancing, what else is going to happen? I think that's why it's way too premature at this point in time to start thinking about opening the economy. The only thing we can do is to just let the science do its part a little bit more and let the international community do what it can in terms of research and see if we can get something conclusive. Otherwise, we'll be back at public health system being choked, and then we'll be back at the economy going flatline. And then what will happen? There are going to be political costs built into it, and somebody will have to bear that. And White House should know better.
The problem is that, we are dealing with people who are unconcerned with science. They don't respect science. They don't understand it. They don't appreciate it. They don't seem to understand how science figures into this economic calculus, right? And if it doesn't fit into this economic calculus, this White House is like, well, fuck science then, right? I mean, 80,000 dead is absolutely nothing to sneeze at. But when we look at what's happening in China, so China, we know, took extraordinary steps to try to contain the virus once it was pretty clear that this was an epidemic. They had widespread lockdown orders, a lot of social distancing, self-isolation, and they did this for a number of weeks, even months. And when Wuhan province started to reopen ever so slowly, now China's dealing with something that I think a lot of us need to be paying attention to, and that is a potential second wave of outbreaks. They have reported their first number of new infections in a number of days. And now the government of China has said that they intend on testing 11 million people in Wuhan province, which is extraordinary and ambitious at the same time. I think here in the US, we've tested around 2 million people, which is a paltry number of a nation of 330 million. Aman, when we see what's happening in China, we've heard doctors here stateside warn about a potential outbreak, second wave of coronavirus coming possibly this fall, even this winter. Dr. Fauci, when he was addressing the Senate, he was talking about the possibilities of a vaccine, but he was saying the best case scenario for a vaccine, if it's successful, it won't roll out until fall, winter. That's if it's successful. If it's some shit, then I don't know what's going to happen to us. But what are your thoughts about this second emergence of coronavirus in China?
I think it's significant. It only goes on to prove that what Dr. Fauci has been saying and many others in the international community, that just hang on, let there be a little bit more clarity of what we are dealing with, is just the right thing to do. And it makes a common sense as well. So I think this whole push towards just opening the economy without taking into consideration a lot of what is happening worldwide. And then we're also dealing with in China that they have that kind of a political system, and the government intervention kind of makes things simpler for them. But here in the United States, we have a more open democratic kind of social integration where you have to go, there are so many moving parts, and that is why the whole of government approach needs to be there. But it seems to me as though the White House and the administration is just interested in speaking with its own base. They are not concerned about what the rest of the country thinks about their approach. And the way the pronouncements coming out of President Trump makes it quite clear. Even the way he's addressing the press corps at the different press briefing, it seems to me as though he's just making those political arguments rather than actually, making or going all out in terms of making sure that the public health and safety is ensured before we even start thinking towards reopening of the economy. It's just way too premature at this point in time. And there's a lot of consensus about it. The rest is about whether this administration is willing to pay heed to what the international consensus emerging to be or not. And it seems as they don't, unfortunately, at this point in time.
Jacqueline Luqman, what are your thoughts about 11 million tests? Or Mark, whoever can get in first. Y'all also.
Listen, the Chinese government is able to test 11 million people. Now, their time frame is really ambitious. They're saying they want to test everyone in Wuhan province in 10 days. Now, I have no doubt that they are able to test everyone in Wuhan province. I don't know if they'll be able to do it in 10 days, but that just seems so such an insurmountable task to me, only because I live in a capitalist imperialist country that can't even test more than 5% of this population. We haven't even tested 5% of this population. We tested about 1% of this population. And so that's why that kind of announcement is like, oh my God, how can they do that? Well, because their government prioritizes the needs and the health and the safety of the people, of the collective, over the profits of any company and over politics. That's foreign to us here. But this second wave is a real thing. And we are seeing what will happen in countries like Germany, in South Korea, in Sweden. A bunch of politicians, usually GOP folks, and these crazy eugenics light people, because I swear they just want a bunch of people to die who are not European. They've been looking at, Sweden didn't lock down. Look at them. They're the model. Well, Sweden had a high number of deaths among its population of elderly people. And now they are seeing more cases of infections emerging because they didn't implement a lockdown. Really, most people did stay home, but they didn't implement a government enforced lockdown. So we're seeing a resurgence of cases in South Korea. In Germany, they're seeing a resurgence of cases after they're lifting some of the restrictions. Same thing happened in Wuhan. Same things happened in Sweden. We know what's going to happen when these restrictions are eased. We just have a government really that's honestly a white supremacist death cult. They just
And
really
Jacqueline,
are.
if I may add, I mean, we're talking about the second wave and third wave. What about the reinfection? There's not even a clarity of people getting reinfected. I mean, so this is like literally just taking this blind guesswork a little bit too far. So I think that's why, and also we're talking about countries where population is a little bit more homogeneous, like in South Korea for that matter, or in Sweden. But in countries like United States, where there are so many ethnic groups, the kind of a public health messaging, the requirements are so very different, and you need a lot more sophistication, and you need to kind of keep people abreast of what is going on right now. As you see, there is so much of an information deficit. There's so much of a deficit in terms of what the science is and who should people listen to. That's the recipe of disaster in, on top of what exactly is going on in terms of resurgence of the virus, reinfection, and then what's going to happen 2 months from now. I think there are so many questions, Mark, that any definitive stance towards reopening the economy just does not make any sense. It's plain and simple.
I mean, I think this is a double-edged sword, though, in some ways. Let me take a semi-contrarian view here, on some levels. So the reason the United States, as we've all been saying, can't address this is because we have this free-for-all capitalist economy, huge libertarian and philosophical political streak that fuels that kind of market economy thinking. We don't have a public health system that is actually a public health system. Private hospitals can't keep up. They don't have the money. They're losing money because they're a business enterprise, not just a health system. So there are all kinds of factors here in this country that are diminishing our capabilities in the United States for addressing what we face. And we have been in a civil war in this country almost since its founding. So those things are real. The other hand, let's think this thing through a little bit. I mean, I think that China's response was in terms of a lockdown, creating enough tests for people to be tested is really important. There's another angle to that, though. The other angle is that China, along with Israel, along with a number of other countries, have begun to use technology, surveillance technology, that in the hands of power, whether it's the Chinese government or American capitalists in the hands of power, can be really dangerous in the long term. They're talking about monitoring everybody's cell phone in China, in Israel, in other countries like that. And so there are a lot of reasons why they're tracking this down. And when we have a certain consciousness also about our civil liberties, if we need to track us to stop this disease, we need to track us. But you need things in place to ensure that that tracking doesn't become part of a corporate government surveillance of the entire country that lives on after the pandemic. And I think it's more complex, I think, than just saying, China did everything right, the United States did everything wrong. U.S. has done everything wrong because our system is built, especially with these people in power now, to kind of destroy rather than build. And I think so those things are very real. I mean, you see literally there's new technology being developed that's going to allow us to surveil everything we do. So while we have to stop the pandemic, and we might have to use that technology, we need to put in place things that do not allow them to use that technology to seize control of the entire country. So I think that's something we have to think about. And this pandemic, I mean, it is a when you think about what could be happening in the next few months and what other diseases may be lurking around and how this may morph into new disorders out of COVID-19. As I said earlier, there's so much we do not know about how this develops and what it can morph into. And these are the things that the government needs to be kind of investing lots of time and money into, as well as to do testing as many people as they can in this country, across the board. But the U.S. is incapable, given the system that we have, we're incapable of doing that.
Mark, from the comments, gang. I'm sorry. Hold on. Let me read. We have some people hopping in here in the conversation. Sam says, "Yeah, we've tested less than 1%, but baseball teams get all the tests that they want." That is very, very accurate. And also, 206 War Eagle, friend of the show, He hits us up all the time. He brings up an interesting question. He says, what about people who don't want the test or vaccine? It should be a choice to take them or not, eh? War Eagle, 206 War Eagle, I would say you might be able to opt out of the vaccine. I don't think you should be able to opt out of the test, though. I think it's in the greater good for everyone to get tested. But I share a little bit of reluctance. I'm not an anti-vaxxer by any stretch of the imagination.
No.
But I am dubious about the first version of any fucking thing, right? Like, they haven't worked out the kinks. They haven't worked out all the bugs. Don't give me the first version of it. I'll take COVID Vax 2.0. Don't give me that first version. I'll wait for the second version to come around. But what are your thoughts about that, gang? Can you opt out of the vaccine if you choose?
Yeah,
Well, I mean,
I think you should.
You can't go around hog tying people and swabbing their mouths. I mean, I don't want to see that happen either. I mean, but I think that if people want to opt out, then that the vast majority of Americans will not opt out. They're going to want the test. The vast majority of Americans want to be tested, want their families to be tested. So you have a bunch of a minority of right-wing nutcases who think that everybody's after them, and they don't want to be tested. Forget them. Don't get tested. Get COVID. Cull the herd. Go away. It's fine.
Well,
but I think we should universally be testing people. It should be done through our public health systems. Should be done through our hospitals. Everyone that needs to be tested should be tested. Everyone who feels they should be tested should be tested. I think that's something we should make available, and it's absurd we're not doing it.
Yeah.
Also, I think this testing is not just one-time thing that you get tested and then everything's all right. This is actually going to be a periodic testing, because that ties into the whole argument of whether you can reinfect it or not. The point, I guess, really here is that at the same time, you're not just looking at yourself or your own health, but you're also looking at the public health, because that's exactly where the argument of social distancing comes in. I mean, that's why you're not allowed, or you're advised not to get in touch with people, because it not only endangers your health, but you can endanger someone else's health too. So I think there are trade-offs here, and by all means, this is an extraordinary situation. This is not as though it happened last year or 10 years ago, and this is how we did it. No, this is unprecedented, and I think that is why it's important to kind of take those measures so that at least there is some degree of certainty to the public, whether we can, or a certainty to the argument whether we are in any shape or form close to even opening up an economy or going towards it. I guess that's an important thing to do.
I mean, I think Mark, what you said about the surveillance issue, I agree with you. You're absolutely right about that. I think that the issue that I have is that people will just do whatever, is in their minds, because you have people who are looking at the surveillance issue and the expansion of the police state and the weaponization of social distancing measures against certain groups of people. We've seen NYPD was reported just this past week that the NYPD was handing out masks to white people in the park in one area of the city, but they were literally locking up Black and Latino people in another area of the city for social distancing violations. So we're seeing the extension of the police state with COVID-19 as an excuse for the extension of the police state. At the same time, I don't want people to use that very valid issue as an excuse to say that the virus doesn't exist, and it is that the virus was created to precipitate these abuses of the state. The abuses of the state were always here. That's why more Black and Latino people, that's why more poor people, Native people are dying from the virus right now, because the abuses of the state were already in existence. I too have a serious problem with the whole track and trace of any, using any new technology for that. But this device right here already gives more of our information to whoever wants to buy it through the ads that we allow on our social media platforms, these little neat games that we play. Oh, what kind of animal are you? You keep playing those damn games, you're giving these people your information. So I mean, on the one hand, yes, we have to be very, very careful that we're not giving the keys to our privacy kingdom, I guess, to the surveillance state in this country. But we also have to be very clear that the surveillance state in this country is already in our fucking house because we've opened the door. That's not an excuse to allow them to do this, but let's be real about where we are, and let's not make China out to be, the worst perpetrator of this on the block, because they're not. When you look at the Patriot Act that is about to be reauthorized and the shit that's in that, you come on. So I mean, it is.
Well,
We have to be very. I think we have to be very careful that we're not giving, and this is a really fine line, that we're not giving people who believe these conspiracies that the virus was created in order to do these things more oxygen, because that's not the case, while also being careful about, what we are allowing in regard to our personal liberties. And no, people should not be forced to take this vaccine when one finally comes along if they don't want to. I don't think that's the right thing to do at all.
Well, I mean, a couple things. I mean, I'm sorry.
No, I was going to say, I agree with you, Jackie. No, people shouldn't be forced to take vaccines. At the same time, people aren't forced to take vaccines now. And we've seen different outbreak clusters pre-COVID-19 of different things like measles and mumps, because, there's a whole contingent of anti-vaccination folks in this country who don't believe in those sort of things at all. Now, I'm like a tepid believer, right? You can give me the measles, mumps, rubella vaccination all day, twice on Sundays. I'm never going to take a flu vaccination, never have had one in my life, and I never intend to have one. And like I said, I'm not taking this first COVID vaccine. I'm not going to take the first one. I'm like, come get me when they get 2.0. When the second one is ready, after it's proven that it's not going to make you grow a tail, then you can poke me with that second vaccine. But that first one,
I'll get my flu shot. I always get my flu shots. I mean, I don't. If they can kill some of the strains, and I'm not going to get really sick, I'm taking it. But I think that the other thing, though, is that a couple of things that we've been talking about here is that the way the police reaction to the shutdown in different states has been really interesting to watch. You take Ohio, for example. In Ohio and all these states where they have allowed these armed white militia gangs to storm in and take over state capitals, not disarm them, not stop them. Those same states are arresting disproportionate numbers of black and brown people for not social distancing. I mean, it's just glaring. In Ohio, they're arresting black and brown people, going on people's front lawns, pulling people off street corners and arresting them, not going up and saying, "Oh, here's a mask, wear this mask, separate 6 feet, you can't do this." No, they're arresting them.
Right.
So that is happening, and that has to be called out. That has to be called out.
Absolutely.
And has to be at an edge of a struggle, saying that is not acceptable. This is it just shows the basic racist nature of this society. That is really critical for us to understand.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
But the other part of what you were saying, I'm not. I don't want to get too much of a sidebar into this, Jacqueline. Maybe it's interesting for us to really discuss this sometime and really talk about it. I am not a fan of a capitalist Chinese authoritarian state that passes itself off as a communist state when it's not. And it uses those measures to repress its own people all the time. And so I can't sit idly by and go, okay, that's fine. With America does it too, so we shouldn't attack China. I'm sorry. I think that what they've done in their Western provinces, and the surveillance technology they're building that's going to be in place on all trains and all kinds of modes of transportation now, and maybe in people's homes, it's unacceptable as societal behavior. And one man or woman's oppression and repression is mine, and so I don't accept it.
Well, whose society are you talking about, and how do you get to tell people who live in another society how their society is run? I mean, that's the kind of
I'm not telling the people. I'm telling the government. I'm telling the government because of what they do, not the people.
Okay, but You didn't vote for the Chinese government. You
Neither
don't.
did the Chinese.
You're not.
And neither
You're
did the
not.
Chinese.
You're not. I mean, so
they don't require the voting
if,
there.
If we are people, I am a person who believes in a people's right to their own self-determination. I don't have to like the way they run their government, but if that's the government that they have,
didn't we all oppose South Africa and apartheid? Didn't we all do that? We all
the people who were being oppressed in South Africa didn't choose their government. They didn't choose their government. Now,
I think
listen.
Also,
what we are talking about now, we could credit not and let me go back to what you said about being a fan of China. I never said that anybody had to be a fan of anybody's fucking government. All governments lie. So this is the journalist I.F. Stone said that, and I absolutely believe that. Just because I agree with the way that China has handled this particular issue, it doesn't mean that I think that everything the Chinese government does is wonderful.
I didn't say that.
I'm not saying that anybody has to be a fan of China. What I am saying is that when governments respond to national crises in a way that prioritize its people over profit and is able to take care of its people in that crisis, and this government that doesn't ever do that at all turns around and criticizes that government, and not only criticizes them, but blames them for the failures of this government. No, that's a serious problem, especially when we are able to point to long-standing issues like racialized police abuse that existed before coronavirus. That is made worse, and that is now, it's just glaring because we're all at home now. So that's what I'm talking about. I'm not saying that you have to be a fan of China. Don't be a fan of China. Okay, fine. But China has implemented measures that has done a better job at protecting its people. They instituted a lockdown in Wuhan and Hubei provinces. The Chinese government, when they locked people down, they made sure people had food. They made sure people didn't have to worry about paying their rent. They made sure people had the medicine that they needed. The testing was free. Treatment was free. Do we have that in this country?
Jacqueline, I think there's one more argument to be made about this.
Hold on, gang. Let Aman get in here. Go ahead.
There's one more argument to be made about this. I think Jacqueline and my observation is that the fact that the China is doing the way it did is also has an economic logic embedded in it. It's not just a matter of public health. It's a matter of getting things fixed quickly so that they can get their economic engine back online. Sure. So that's definitely one of the economic logic into what they did. And also on the point of view, on the surveillance part, remember that's the same surveillance mechanism that enabled them to lock millions of people in Xinjiang, which is a Uyghur Muslim minority group, in the name of their re-education. So I think that's very important kind of an argument to kind of bear in mind in terms of whether we can put our stamp on a particular society. And I think the really, it boils down to whether a citizen of any state can opt out of a certain measure determines whether there's what is the democratic freedom available to the citizens. The fact that none of the Chinese citizens can say no to any measure approved by the Communist Party of China means that we're not talking about a democracy there. But here, we can still have the argument about whether a person can opt out of the vaccine. And that's what determines in terms of the difference of political system that we're talking about. So I think there are nuances which needs to be considered. I mean, I under no circumstances can justify that the same Chinese regime can actually work with the Uyghur Muslim minority, the same surveillance, starve camps and make people work the way they want to in the name of re-education. So I think it's an important distinction to be made in this argument. That's all I'm saying.
We don't live in a democracy in this country. We had just had New York cancel a fucking primary. We don't live in a democracy in this country. So, I mean, I'm not sure how this discussion went from whether China is a good country or a bad country. That's not the point. The point is the measures that China has taken to address the coronavirus outbreak compared to what this country has done. And if we're talking about surveillance, all countries surveil their citizens to an extent that nobody should be comfortable with. China is not
has surveillance envy.
China is not any more guilty of that than any other country, developed country on the planet. That is my point. That not that China is this shining beacon of whatever it is. It's just that demonizing China for any particular thing as if they are the worst purveyors of whatever it is people want to demonize
nobody said
them
that.
on.
What are you talking about?
I think that's not even the argument here.
I mean,
that's not even the argument here.
The United
said that,
Kingdom,
Jacqueline.
but that kind of is the suggestion that is being made. That when you bring up all these other issues,
it's absolutely not what's being suggested.
Okay, well, listen. The United Kingdom has been the most surveilled country in the world for decades. Nobody said too much about the surveillance with all the CCTV in the UK. As a matter of fact, it was all of the UK CCTV was a staple in British crime shows. I mean, this stuff is not new. Does that mean it's good and we shouldn't push back on it? No, but I'm just saying, put it in the context that it belongs in this discussion of the way countries have responded to this virus. That's all I'm saying.
All right. Speaking of discussion, hi, how y'all doing? It's Kim.
Oh, I'm sorry. Kim, are you on the show too? Oh, I'm sorry.
y'all ran away. Y'all ran away from me. Let me bring y'all back. Come on back.
I'll be good.
Right.
I'll be good.
Okay.
I will not be good.
From the comment, Robert Barat says Americans are and have been a population bred on entertainment and impulsivity with profound political and historical ignorance. Is it really a surprise that more and more want to return to work? Excellent point there, Robert. We're going to move on, gang, because we have some other things that we need to get to in the hour. Speaking about our food supply. So this is a story that sort of overlaps several different things. So we know that the Tyson's chicken plant or pork plant in Iowa had been closed for 2 weeks because there had been a number of cases of COVID-19 infections. Well, one concern is that the state of Iowa and the Tyson's processing plant have underreported these numbers. Okay, in Black Hawk County, Iowa, health officials said on Thursday that there have been over 1,000 infections at the processing plant alone. Okay, that's almost 40% of the workforce at that particular plant. Now, the disconnect in the information comes because the Iowa Department of Health announced that only 444 workers have tested positive. Well, we can all do the math. That's a very big discrepancy. And this has been an issue ongoing, different places in the country, where either infections are being underreported or even deaths from coronavirus are being underreported because more people have died at home than have been reported. And a lot of people are getting tested, but for reasons unbeknownst to many of us, these numbers are being underreported. So, Aman, when we look at, first of all, people who are producing our food, who have this virus, and the numbers are being underreported, but the company itself, Tyson's, is insisting that the plant reopen. And of course, President Trump enabled the Defense Production Act against food processing workers, in effect, to make them return to work. This does not bode well for our reopening. But in addition to, there's a Smithfield plant in Nebraska where there have been a handful of positive tests, and I think 2 people have died. And every Saturday, the children of these Smithfield plant workers have been protesting outside of the plant. Let's take a look at what they have to say.
Saturday in Crete, the second round of drive-by protests against the lack of COVID-19 safety conditions at Smithfield Foods.
That's the farthest it can be. Yeah.
Protesters were seen donning signs down Main Street with sayings like essential, not disposable. The workers experiencing a quick turnaround on Tuesday that didn't give them the initial 2 weeks closure they were hoping to get.
When are we going to stop? Like when 300 people are sick? Is that when the company's going to stop?
Children of workers representing their parents while they rest.
We would rather not eat meat for weeks or even months, as long as everyone's safe and the crisis decrease.
I haven't been able to hug my mom in the past 2 weeks, because she's worried that she's gonna affect any of us if she has it,
Emmanuel Sanchez, a graduate from UNL, says it was the income his parents made from working at the plant that got him his degree.
My parents personally are proud to be working at Smithfield. They're thankful. I've heard my mother thank God 1,000,000 times for that job. We don't want them to be affected, but we don't want to be affected ourselves. And we don't want our town to be affected. This town was built from Smithfield.
But he and others want to know when enough is enough.
I think a fair outcome would be for them to quarantine our parents at least 2 weeks, pay them for those 2 weeks, and let the curve flatten a little bit.
The fight still going strong, while nearly 50 confirmed cases all linked to the meat processing plant.
And that report was from KLKN TV, ABC News 8 in Lincoln, Nebraska. Aman, what's your take on what you just saw and from what the children of the people who work at that plant where there have been confirmed COVID cases, what they had to say?
Well, I think it only tells me that corporate profiteering knows no limits, and it's like some people are turned into sacrificial lambs so that some people can enjoy their pork chops. So I think that's really it should be a matter of concern to everybody. That is why anything coming out of the Trump White House that says that let's just go ahead and open these meat plants or what Amazon is doing for that matter, it just does not square with the basic rights of the people. No, public health comes first and then the economy comes. I think that's the entire logic which needs to be followed at this point in time, especially when people who are actually delivering food are getting sick. Then what can you expect from the food even?
Yeah.
I think.
Go ahead, Jackie.
Jackie,
don't make me come after you again, Martin.
He hasn't even said anything yet.
Warning you. No, I think that I can't remember. I mess with Mark all the time, so I don't want people to get freaked out.
Okay.
And go, oh my God, she's being so mean to Mark. No, I mess with Mark all the time. So.
We like each other a lot.
So I think I can't remember the judge who said this. This was a lady judge who said about the infections of that are occurring in these meat processing plants that the virus isn't infecting regular people. And the judge was, white lady from some middle America state. So I think that is a reflection of the attitude that people have about the people who are being impacted by this virus in these environments. As much as it's true that people in this country are really unconcerned about how our food gets to our table, we don't understand the cancer that industrial food processing is on our entire way of life, just from produce to table, from everything from vegetables and fruit to meat processing. The industrial food industry is just a horror show. But also it does speak to, when you looked at that video, those were Latino workers, those were immigrant people, they were the children of immigrants, and poor Black people and poor white people, and who cares about them, locked away in those massive factories on the line doing that repetitive, dangerous work. As long as their food gets to the table, they don't care but some people don't care how many of those folks are sacrificed. And the comments about the people who are being impacted in those environments reflect that. Someone else, I think it was a CEO of one of the companies, said that it's the workers' fault. Their lifestyle is causing these infections. So we're getting a really, really good look at the enormous class divide in this country, and just how xenophobic and just blatantly racist we are.
Marc Steiner, one thing that jumped out at me was one of the gentlemen in the piece who was talking about how his mother works at the plant, how he didn't hate Smithfield, right? He said that how grateful his mother was to have that job, that job helped to put him through college. So what I saw was a sentiment of still loyalism to the company, but a begging of humanity and simple consideration from the company that the workers who have been dedicated and hardworking and putting their lives on the line throughout this pandemic, that they're not getting that same amount of loyalism in return.
I wouldn't expect him to get it either. I mean, look, let me start this way. I covered that industry for a long while. We used to have a radio series that came on every week for like 5 or 6 years, was it more even, called and that series, which was called Sound Bites, we were looking at the agriculture industry a lot, and industrial farming, and people like Tyson and companies like Tyson. They have been abusing our environment and destroying the waterways with all the crap they put in it from their plants. They don't care about their employees unless their employees fight for their unions, like in certain meatpacking plants in Iowa. Then they have a certain amount of power. But they don't care about these employees. They don't care what happens to them. And so and when you see their children on the street begging the plant to shut down for 2 weeks and pay their parents so they won't get sick and they won't die. I mean, that shouldn't have to happen. That's the kind of stuff that this economy pushes. It's just about profit and not people, and they could care less. And you're right. In this particular plant in Iowa and some of these other plants, many of the people who work there are immigrants, and they're immigrants from Central America and Mexico. And it's they're the ones also behind some of these movements in this country that are pushing to reopen America, not caring about what happens to the people around them. And people are loyal to a company because, well, that's what the kid said. What does that really mean? I mean, that union, that plant, I think, if I'm right, is a unionized plant. So, people have a fairly decent wage, and they have health care, and they have a place to go to work every day. They can pay their mortgage. So people do feel grateful for that. Doesn't mean that and sometimes overly grateful. But the issue is that the people who own those places, like Tyson, could care less. They don't care about the farmers who grow the chickens. They don't care about the chicken pluckers. They don't care about the people who raise the meat. They don't care about the meat workers themselves. They never have and never will. They're some of the most horrendous group of industrial capitalists in the country are the people who run that industry.
And they're the ones who are getting the bailouts as well, Marc.
Right. Exactly, Amar. You're right. Exactly. Yeah, I mean, it's an interest. I'm not surprised that in plants like that is where you're seeing the coronavirus spread. I'm not shocked at all.
Mm. And speaking of bailouts, we've got some help, maybe, possibly coming our way from a contingent of Democratic senators from Bernie Sanders, Ed Murkey, and Kamala Harris. They've actually put forth some legislation, y'all, in the Senate. A lot of people have been complaining that the Trump folks have just been running amok, lifting regulations on the EPA and making meat plant and processing workers, go back to work using the power of the Oval Office. But we haven't seen a lot of pushback from the Democratic members of Congress against some of these, reckless and ineffective policies set forth by the Trump administration. So we know that the stimulus, most people have probably received their stimulus in one form or another. The max was $1,200, which does not pay the rent for 1 month in a majority of places in these United States. So I don't know how in the hell they came up with $1,200. But therefore, ergo, Kamala Harris, Bernie Sanders, Ed Murkey have introduced this bill. It is called, put it up, Dwayne. I can't find it on my TV, or on my screen. It's called like the Monthly Surplus Help Bama's Out Act. That is the official name of it. And what they are proposing are payments of Thank you, sir. The monthly economic support helping Bama's out act of 2020. So what's going to happen is, at least what they're proposing, is payments of $2,000 per person per each member of the household through the duration of the pandemic and the shelter in place orders, which is, I think, the type of money that could not only help people sustain themselves and their households in the short term, but could actually help build up a little bit of a cushion, which we all know the majority of Americans do not have $500 in emergency savings to put their hands on. And it's not that's not a deficiency of you if you're one of those people like me who don't have that kind of money to put, just access it at any given time. That's just how this country is set up. We are set up to continue being in poverty. So don't feel bad if you can't put your hands on $500 right now. But Jackie, I don't think that this bill is going to pass the Senate, but I am at least encouraged to know that someone actually took time to put pen to paper to propose this sort of relief, because this is actually the kind of relief that people could really use, and it could help them not just in the short term, but in the middle to long term as well.
Yeah, I mean, other countries have already done this. Canada has done it. Germany has done it. We're providing monthly assistance to its citizens as they go through this pandemic experience. I don't expect it to pass the Senate either. I think it is more likely that a full-out fist fight will happen on the Senate floor than it is likely that this thing is going to pass. Because Mitch McConnell already said that this kind of thing is going to pass over his dead body. We can say that can be arranged, but look, I'm always going to be the one to say the stuff that everybody's thinking, but everybody's afraid to say. So, but then, you have Democrats like Joe Biden who will undermine this effort also, because that Bama, his idea is, no, we don't have to do that. What we can do is allow people to borrow against their future retirement benefits. And, Biden has been wanting to gut Social Security for years, decades, actually. So, and the Republicans have wanted to do that too. So this is just one step closer to that. So if something like this, close to this, gets passed, if regular Americans get any more money, it is going to be closer to the Biden plan than the Bernie plan. I really don't see this plan as it exists being passed in the Senate. But hey, Donald Trump became president, so who knows? I don't know.
Marc Steiner. I'm sorry, Aman. Go ahead.
Please.
Okay.
Kim, I was just saying that. I think Jacqueline, you hit the nail on the head because it's the same Democratic Party which sidelined Bernie Sanders' political agenda, and the point really isn't that you give X amount of money. Yes, it would help. The real point is that you have to work with the structural economic inequalities with this country, like where people are literally surviving by the paycheck. And this is one of the wealthiest country of the world. It just doesn't square. So unless you correct the basic fault, which is how come less than 1% have more money than the other 99% in this country, this will continue to be a recurring theme in this economy and in this political system. And I don't think that Mr. Biden is going to be the one to fix it. So I think as good as it looks on paper, unfortunately, it would probably stay on paper.
Marc Steiner, we know that Bernie had set forth, the sort of proposal at the onset of the pandemic. It's good that it's actually been introduced formally as a bill into the Senate. But so what's the compromise here? Jackie brought up a good point. Mitch McConnell and the Senate Republicans say that they won't authorize any more aid to the states, or I guess to individuals, unless there are liability protections in place for businesses. Could this be a compromise? Would the Democrats compromise on liability protections if they could get the Republicans to go along with $2,000 a month?
I think if the Democrats are smart, they won't, because this is part of the battle that they're going to have. If I'm not another conversation we've had before. I'm not a Joe Biden fan by any stretch of the imagination, and what he stands for and what he's done. But I am extremely apprehensive about this right-wing, blatant racist takeover of America. That I am very worried about. And I think if they want to stop that and blunt that, they're going to have to fight it. And I think that the right wing is shooting themselves in the foot in the way they're handling the COVID-19 response. And I think that people are going to feel it. So it's they need to fight this tooth and nail. They need to, if they're worth their salt. If Bernie Sanders is worth his salt, if Ed Markey is worth his salt, if Kamala Harris is going to step up to the plate with them, and the others are, they have to fight this tooth and nail and make it a giant public fight to save American families, not to save businesses from liability that screw over American families. And I think this is a really important moment. I mean, I think they cannot back down. This is not the time to back down at this moment.
Okay, we have approached and surpassed the 6 p.m. hour. It's 6:01.
Uh-oh.
Time flies.
Pumpkin time.
Time flies when you're yelling at your coworkers. It does go by kind of quickly. Listen, I'd like to thank our fantastic panel, Jacqueline Luqman, Marc Steiner, and of course, the newest addition to the Real News Bunch. And oh my gosh, I'm about to say your name all backwards, Aman. I'm so sorry. Aman Azhar. Is it Azhar or Azhar?
Azhar, yes. You got it.
I think that's better. Azhar. Aman Azhar. He's new to The Real News here. You guys check out his work at therealnews.com. I'm your host, Kim Brown. Thank you again for watching Stir Crazy. We see y'all got scared. Did nobody call on the Zoom? We see y'all got a whole lot of tough talk in the comments. Did nobody want to show their face? That's okay. We're going to remember that for tomorrow. Right.
Where were y'all?
Come on, bring it to us. Bring it to us. Bring it to us.
That's right. Maybe we sprung it on you too quick. So tomorrow, you know what I'm saying, make sure you got your lighting good, your Zoom background together. And we want to hear from you, seriously. So be sure to drop us a Zoom call tomorrow live. We will take your comments and all such things here on the program. So y'all be easy, take it easy, and watch The Real News. Have a good day. See ya, bye.
Thank y'all.